Yeah? Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi again.
Sounds good.
What's that? My name is Stephen Jast, and I'm the president and founder of Gazelle.ai. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar entitled 5 Ways Top EDOs Are Using AI. I'm joined today by my colleague and co-founder, Simon Leroux, who's the managing director of Gazelle. And I'm also joined directly to my left and your right, I believe, if my sense of direction is still working properly, by Hugh Kelly, Dr. Hugh Kelly, who is our chief economist and chief AI officer. So let me see if this works. Okay. So the agenda for today is to talk a little bit about the history of Gazelle.ai, which is our artificial intelligence tool. We're going to try and make this as non-salesy as we possibly can, but given that there's not a plethora of AI tools for economic development, we may be referencing Gazelle from time to time. So please excuse us, but we really are trying not to be too marketing and salesy. I'll take you through the history of Gazelle.ai. And then Simon Leroux will take us through the 5 use cases of top EDOs who are using artificial intelligence. And then we're all in for a special treat. It's not very often that we get Dr. Kelly out from behind his algorithms, but he's going to talk a little bit about how we built our artificial intelligence, take a bit of a look under the hood at some of the numbers and data, and how in our product we've developed machine learning, more specifically to try and prognosticate corporate level growth. So as I mentioned, it's myself, Hugh, and Simon. So I guess that leaves us nothing but to get started. So I'm going to turn my camera off during the presentation just to try and keep as a robust an internet signal here at home. So I think it's important to go through a really quick history of our company and try and shed a little bit of light as to why we started to develop artificial intelligence. So way back in 2003, we started a company called ROI Research on Investment. So ROI's main goal, and still its main goal, is to try and identify companies that are expanding. And what we call expanding is either building new buildings, bricks and mortar expansion, or hiring significant amounts of new people that are interesting for economic development practitioners. And then what we do is we broker an introductory meeting in between the companies that we have discovered as being in expansion mode with our economic development clients that represent different jurisdictions around the world. So back in 2003, the bulk of the way that we did our research was through telephone calling. That was really the main means of communication. Of course, email was coming online in a very strong way in those times, but it was very difficult to get through to people, and so it created a lot of inefficiencies that we're going to get through, that we're going to talk about a bit later in the presentation. But we always wondered, was there a way for us to develop a technology or develop a modus operandi whereby we could sort of cut down on some of the conversations that we were having with the wrong people inside of an organization, or secondly, a company that simply had no intention of expanding. So a lot of the frustration that we had, back in those early days with a lot of the data products that we were buying, was that there really was relatively poor contact information. We really did not have a lot of names. Even today, it's very difficult to get email addresses. Telephone numbers are often wrong. There's a lot of data decay, meaning that when a data product is 2, 3, 4 months old, we start seeing some pretty significant levels of data that's changed. People change jobs, people retire, people leave organizations, etc. So it causes a tremendous amount of heartburn for people that are on the front lines of doing research. And it's also very difficult to identify the right decision makers. Very often a database product that you would buy would have the president and maybe a couple of other executives. But how do we know if those people really are in charge of the site selection decision-making process? So for these reasons, there were some tremendous inefficiencies. But more than that, there was really no view as to which companies inside of any given database were actually in growth mode. You could build a list of targeted companies in any place in the world and develop a list of hundreds of those companies, but really there's no way to know, is this company on the verge of an expansion? Another big problem that we had was that in using multiple data products, not just company databases, but products that offer different kinds of economic related data and industry data, it was very hard to align the data going from one platform to the next. Some platforms would have industry information based on tagged words. So it would be an overview of an IT industry, whereas a competing product would have it listed by a NAICS code. And you can use that same logic in trying to secure data at the company level. Some companies, for some database products, for example, would list a company, for example, like US Steel would be US Steel, and in another database, United States Steel. So there was a lot of sort of guessing work about how you need to match one company to the next. Now, specifically about inefficiencies and productivity, which is obviously very important now. Economic development organizations are resource strapped. I suspect that heading into 2021, given the disruption in business that we had over the course of the year, economic development organizations may be facing even more severe budgetary constraints. The simple fact of the matter is that when we were using our phone outreach, using lists where we were blind as it related to potential expansion, less than 1% of the prospects that we were reaching out to were yielding a project. And we were still trying back in those days to be sophisticated about this. We looked for cluster growth hotspots. We looked to see where revenues were growing. We were looking to see where employment was growing, where establishments were growing, but still, it was very difficult to find companies that were in growth mode. Now, this is compounded by the fact that it's very tough to get through to decision makers. So if you want to meet a company, based on our experience at ROI over the years, it usually takes about 7 tries to get through to a decision maker. So that could be an email, it could be a phone call, it could be leaving a voicemail. And then on top of that, based on our statistics, it usually takes around 6 touches to get a meeting, right? So 7 tries per touch, 6 touches, that's 42 phone calls, emails, communication attempts, really to finally get that coveted meeting. Now, if we're looking at a list of 100 prospects that you've built, that's 4,000 touches, right? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of people doing a lot of phone calling and a lot of emailing to potentially get through to a company that has no aspiration for expansion, no aspiration of cross-border expansion, no real significant job creation. So really, if we imagine all that effort, again, wrong company, wrong contact, tremendous level of inefficiencies and a poor use of resources. So here is what, how we felt, I should say, after the thousands and thousands of phone calls and emails, and then finally to get through to somebody and have them say, hey, listen, thanks for calling, but you're barking up the wrong tree. There's no project here. So I'm sure that our research team, while I'm certainly not calling them babies, I'm sure that this is how they felt. And the little guy on the right and the little guy in the middle, actually, they have fists. So they're really unhappy. So we came to the realization that data needs to be smarter, it needs to be more targeted, it needs to be more focused. So we started buying more and more and more data with different specializations and different niche approaches that we could take to find those growing businesses. So we use LexisNexis, for example, to better understand international global affiliations. We use natural language processing technology like AI HIT that would let us backfill data in a real-time basis to see who decision makers were. We used Nexology and Veronix, which gave us sentiment analysis in the social world to see if there were specific sentiments about expansion associated with specific companies. We used, let's look at some of the data here, MZ for workforce data. So this is where the frustration came in trying to match companies across different platforms and trying to match data of an industry where a company might be operating in several industries. So it really became quite a difficult endeavor to try and really take a highly focused data approach. So again, even when we tried to buy more data to make the lives of our folks easier, I think the reverse effect kind of happened, and we ended up frustrating them even more. So we thought to ourselves, well, what about artificial intelligence? Can artificial intelligence play a role in helping us with the difficulties that we had? So the basic premise here was to take all the data inputs that we looked at. Now, this is not to say that we're actually inputting data from all these different providers that you're seeing on the left, but the concept, the initial concept, was to take the bits and pieces of data from those different providers, try and match them industry by industry, company by company, data set by data set, data from one platform related to a company on a different one, and then train algorithms to look at all of that data and then to match that to a training set of companies that have already expanded and try and see which of those thousands and thousands and thousands of data pieces that we have are most relevant and telling about a company that is likely to expand in the 18 to 24 months ahead of us. So the hoped for output would be rankings of companies based on their likelihood to grow, cluster growth hotspots, so companies in a specific industry or subsector that showed propensity for expansion. And then we also got very interested in supply chain and cluster leakage to try and help our clients fill those cluster leaks with growth companies from around the world. So some of the traditional signals that we were using at the very outset before AI were revenue growth, employment growth, changes at the C-suite. Did the company make any acquisitions? Did the company have higher than expected sales? From an FDI perspective, we always knew that growth in GDP in the host and destination countries were always important. So these were the kinds of things that we were using, back when we were pre-AI and making those phone calls and emails. But we wondered, well, what about pension plan growth? Gary Kunkel wrote a study on the correlation between pension plan growth and companies that are growing, and he wrote an interesting paper that suggested that because companies have a staff who help the company grow and learned that behavior as it relates to helping the company grow, that they can repeat that behavior. And if companies are holding on to their people, then their pension plans were growing. And so we wanted to see if pension plan growth would actually be a signal that would be worthwhile to look at in looking for growth companies. Did the company have higher than average regional wage growth? Were there lots of patent applications, VC funding, regional cluster growth, job posting intensity? Different financial indicators, inventory and debt to cash ratios, R&D spending, proximity to key infrastructure like ports, airports, highway infrastructure, partnerships, social media intensity, past expansion, and really literally tens and millions of other data points that could be important or not. We didn't know because no human can undertake the same amount of calculation and understanding of data that AI can. So after a number of years, after 3 years of research and development, we built Gazelle.ai. And one of the main things that we started to do was to try and start layering data. So we started to take a look at companies with a high propensity to expand. So we score companies based on their likelihood to grow. We then started taking a look at areas with high revenue growth to see if not only was the company likely to grow from an AI perspective, but were companies in that area also experiencing high levels of revenue growth relative to the rest of, let's say, the US, which is the map that we're looking at right now. We then also wanted to see if there was a high average salary growth in the same areas that we were looking at. And high high average salary growth we thought was important because this likely meant that the company was starting to suffer from eroding margins. They're in an area with very high levels of average salary growth. And average salary growth and salaries work along the same principle as the economy as a whole. If there's not enough supply to meet demand, prices go up. So if a company is losing profits or their profits are diminishing, they can't find workforce, then our thinking was these are the kinds of companies that may be looking to expand outside of their home jurisdiction. It also allowed us to prepare more targeted outreach, based on your unique selling proposition. So for example, in this use case, if you had lower salaries and you were much lower on the spectrum of average salary growth, yet you had the same kind of skill sets, or you were able to transfer skills of your workforce for the kinds of companies that you're looking to recruit, well, this heat map that you're looking at now and targeting companies in the red areas, we think would be far more relevant than just building a list and cold calling. So some of the use cases that Simon, my partner, will get into in a much more detailed way. We see economic development practitioners using AI for lead generation, lead nurturing, business retention, building customized content based on where a company is in your sales funnel, better data-driven fit targeting. We call fit targeting. Fit is a word that we use. It's really very obvious. Is a lead a good fit for your region? So using this kind of data would give you a better idea if an individual company is worth your time trying to pursue, instead of, again, making those thousands and thousands of phone calls just to speak to a company that really is not a good fit. Better use of your marketing dollars, better use of your human resources, less inefficiencies, and hopefully, of course, at the end of the day, more projects for you. So today, and here's my shameful sales pitch, but this will probably be about the end of the sales pitch. I have 2 slides of sales, which are the next 2. So today, Gazelle offers detailed company profiles in about 10 million international companies. We have about 20 million executive contacts, 18,000 AI-powered heat maps across 22 economic indicators. We have 900 in-depth industry profiles, 900 in-depth industry supply chain intelligence. So we map out the buying and selling ecosystems of 900 industries with the associated companies. We allow our subscribers to blend their searches. Sometimes a NAICS search, as we talked about a bit earlier, is not the best way to search, and so other data platforms will use a keyword search. So for example, if you're looking for drones, the closest you'll probably get is aerospace. But if you just use an aerospace NAICS code, you're probably not going to find a lot of drones, because if you were actually to use a keyword search for drones, and then you looked at the NAICS codes that they were associated to, some of them are in optical manufacturing, because they're building the cameras and the lenses that go on the drones. They could be military applications. So there's software. So using a NAICS code alone is not as effective as pairing it with a keyword. We also track on a real-time basis VC-funded companies, and we also track for our users the list of participants at their targeted trade shows. So the platform has been fairly well received. We launched it in January 2017. We have over 1,200 subscribers today in over 30 countries. We're always developing new AI. Right now, the AI that we have is to score companies based on their likelihood to expand. But we're now working on artificial intelligence signals and scoring for companies likely to be involved in M&A. We're also building artificial intelligence for a location score, which would be suggestive of a region where a company could be successful should they expand to that region. So as an economic development practitioner, if you score high in that for a particular industry, well, that would mean that it's probably going to be worth your while to target those kinds of companies. The platform also has achieved very high scores on G2, which is the largest peer-to-peer review platform in the world. We have a 4.7 on 5 overall score, which is higher than some products like DataFox and Inside Sales, amongst others. And we were just recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in Canada as being part of the New Growth Emerging Companies list. With some other accolades, we were also nominated for top AI company in Canada. Okay, so that's it for my selfless self-promotion. And at this time, I'm going to ask my partner Simon to take the floor, and he's going to take you through those 5 use cases for economic development organizations that we talked about as part of the title for this webinar. And then Hugh will come back on to talk specifically about the artificial intelligence. Now, before I give up my turn here, please note that you can feel free at any time to write questions in the little question box. You should all have kind of a panel to the right of your screen, and at the bottom there's a section that's called questions. So if you write a question in there, I'll see it and I'll ask Simon or Hugh, or maybe I'll even answer it myself at the end of the presentation. I'll have a quick Q&A. And the session is being recorded, so we'd be happy to send you the recording to anybody who'd like a copy. So Simon, the floor is now all yours.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you. Nice meeting everybody. So I'm sharing my cam also maybe for the first couple of minutes, and then I'll turn it off also just to manage bandwidth. We're all working from home. I hope everybody's safe. One of the things that I think we've been very blessed, and I've been very blessed with during this whole like COVID-19 is spending even more time with our customers. And certainly, you know, what I will do today is do 2 things. First, I will be sharing with you, you know, some of the ways that I've seen our clients and a lot of economic development agencies using AI during COVID-19. And I will be also sharing 5 specific use cases of successful EDOs, economic development organization, using artificial intelligence in a very clever way. So super excited to share this information with you. As you can probably tell right now, I'm French Canadian. So some people think the accent is funny. Some people think it's charming. I'll make an effort to speak as slow as possible and not to invent too many words. It should be okay, but you know, bear with me. You'll see that I'm a passionate guy. I love AI. I like what we're doing here at Gazelle, and super excited again to share that with you. So I'd
be happy to translate at any time if you need, Simon.
All right,
I'm here for you.
There's really like 3 ways that, you know, we've seen economic developers using AI during COVID-19, and clearly at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that, you know, a lot of EDOs rightfully so mentioned that they need to, you know, focus their efforts on BR&E and really start creating some value for their local employers and community. Everybody was looking for help. You know, nobody really knew what to do, and I think that the smart way was to focus on your local employers. Now I'll give you some examples of how some successful EDOs have been able to do that. The other thing is, you know, as I guess the pandemic progressed and we started realizing that this is there to stay, and at the same time, like all of our you know, plans have changed for 2020. No more traveling, no more trade shows. You know, I've seen some successful EDOs, you know, wanted to use that time to build and develop their 2021 business retention and attraction strategic plan. So a little bit more time to be strategic with the mindset of when everything's going to be back to normal, we'll be ready, we'll have updated all of our material, and we'll be ready basically to serve and do our job properly. And finally, I think that the most surprising aspect, but I would say, you know, where we've seen the most traction is those EDOs that went on offense and decided, you know what, I mean, we're stuck at home, we cannot travel anymore. But the thing is that if we stop prospecting, if we stop being active, if we stop contacting companies, the reality is that our pipeline will suffer. And you know, when things gonna recover will be, you know, basically 12, 18, 24 months, you know, back. So let's at least use that time. Let's use the fact that, you know, a lot of those companies are, you know, maybe have a little bit more time, or they're also working from home, to at very least, like have those conversations, build that rapport, and build those relationships. And I want to share some examples of that as well. All right, so maybe it looks like I don't have control. Oh yeah, I do. it takes a bit of time. So, here's a few examples of how we've seen EDOs using AI for their BR&E efforts. And there's quite a lot of examples here, but I think that one of the very smart thing to do is to leverage the type of data that they can find on their local companies, and start using things like we do have something called a Gazelle feed, but there's all kinds of different ways as well to track what's been going on with your key employers, monitor any news and activities at the regional or headquarter level, and use that data to timely engage with those companies. But one of the things that we've done on our side is that we started training our AI to identify companies and industries that were hiring despite COVID-19. And quite surprisingly, there's been like some industries, and you will talk about that later on, but there's some industries that have been performing really, really well. And there's some companies that have been like hiring a lot despite COVID. And we train our AI to pick up on those companies, and we actually publish like lists inside of our platform, things like the companies hiring during COVID-19. We've actually identified like close to 1,000 of those companies. We've also identified the most pandemic resilient companies. So that kind of data and the fact that we've been able to train our AI to pick up those companies has been extremely, extremely useful. Now, the other point, actually, this is something that one of our clients shared with me, and I thought was brilliant. He called the concept the value-added BR&E visit. And anybody in economic development knows how important it is to do BR&E. I think that it always starts there, and it creates tons of opportunity. But traditionally, a lot of us have been doing BR&E calls, and we were kind of in a info seeking, question asking mode, going and asking a lot from those companies that were present in our service territory. And this specific client decided to kind of reverse this and start creating value for the companies during those visits. And one way to create value is data. A lot of smaller companies don't necessarily have a lot of data, access to data, or they might need needs and they might need help with finding their next client, or finding their next supplier, or discovering where they should export, or that kind of stuff. And this specific client's been using data and AI to basically build lists, and every time he was going in front of a local company, he was creating value on those calls. And I thought that was brilliant and really clever way of AI. So next slide. Just gonna wait if it moves. If not, Steve, you may want to help me out here. There you go. Thank you so much. So, the whole notion of building your business retention and attraction strategic plan, there's quite a lot of things that you can do with AI to do that. I'd like to talk about two things specifically. You'll see in the use cases that I will be covering in a minute or so. There's been a lot of usage of our heat maps to do that. But there's also been a lot of our clients and successful EDOs that have been using keywords to identify emerging trends and companies in their targeted sector. And if you're a big agriculture community, you may want to look, okay, so what's next with ag tech, and is there any potential play for us in vertical farms or greenhouse? Or if you're a big automotive sector, what's going on with intelligent vehicles? What are some of the companies that are really performing well there? What are some of the words or trends from a litter standpoint, or just autonomous vehicles? And start really like mapping out those industries, finding out the emerging players, the emerging trends and companies, deciding where they want to focus their efforts in 2021 from a prospecting standpoint, updating a lot of their marketing material. So that's been like again another clever use of AI and data, and taking the time to actually go in 2021 and be ready with a very targeted and organized approach. So that's that's something that we've seen, a lot of our clients looking at. We move on to the next slide. There you go. All right. Last but not least, we've seen a lot of our economic development organization clients leveraging this time, like I said earlier on, to be proactive with their investment attraction efforts and building their pipeline. So of course, there's fewer companies that have actually expanded in 2020, despite the fact that there's been quite a lot of announcement this year. But we've seen the quality and the quantity of very, very good conversation with companies happening. So those EDOs that have been proactive and said, listen, we're going to use that time to build relationship with key site selectors. That's actually a feature and a data point that we've been adding inside of our platform. Allowing your users to, build those relationships with, the site selectors that are involved in the type of projects and their region also that they're active in. So that's been a really smart way. But also things like, there's no trade shows, but there's a lot of virtual trade shows, and probably for the next, couple of months, at least Q1 and Q2 of 2021, a lot of the trade shows will probably not take place. Although I've seen, surprisingly, that in some part of the world, like trade shows are happening business as usual. So hopefully things will go well, and we'll all be able to travel again in 2021 and attend those trade shows. But no matter what happens with those trade shows, there's a way, for clients and successful EDOs to basically go in and be proactive with their outreach and reach out to those companies that are showing, based on artificial intelligence signals for growth and expansion. So seeing tons of different use cases there. So let me maybe move on to the next slide and discuss like very specific, use cases on how we've seen economic development agencies leveraging the data and the platform. So the first one is the University of Arizona, and one of the things that we have, here at Gazelle, we're really blessed to work with a lot of EDOs worldwide, but we also have a pretty strong, clientele in the university and higher education, industry. And obviously, like I said earlier on, there's been some companies that have been actually growing and recruiting, during COVID-19, and University of Arizona specifically have been, leveraging AI to look for those companies and really, look at signals and data points such as patents application, like R&D grants. We actually gathered a lot of this data inside of our platform. That's been like some of the firm levels, data and signals that we've been adding in 2020 inside of our platform. So leveraging that kind of data allows them to focus their efforts on targeting those companies that are in growth mode, that are in hiring mode, and that may have a fit with, the kind of talent that they're developing at the University of Arizona. So that's been like a really clever way to leverage AI. The other one, which is classic, is using like keywords and blended search capabilities, again, to even be a little bit more focused on their research and targeting criteria. And the last, I don't have a bullet point for this, but we've seen a lot of higher education, community colleges leveraging AI and data to look for their local companies and basically look at those local companies that needs to go through a transformation. Maybe this transformation is being accelerated because of COVID-19, and basically kind of prioritize their outreach to those companies and basically like work on things like workforce improvement, a continuous education program, and that sort of stuff. So definitely seeing tons of use cases in the higher ed and sector. On the next slide, please. Oops. Is it possible? Yeah, all right. So the other classic use case is FDI. Sunday is, Sunday is actually the economic development agency responsible for attracting businesses in Costa Rica. I think that they've been using AI in a very clever way. One of their positioning is to go after VC-funded companies and basically reach out to them to become their kind of platform to access the Latin American market. And there's a couple of ways that they've been able to use AI to do that. One is leveraging VC-funded data. So we actually, demonstrated that, for some industries, obviously in technology, this is predominant. The fact that a company is raising a Series A or Series B, specifically Series B funding round, has a strong correlation with the likelihood of that company to actually physically expand in the future. And typically Series A data and Series A funding is used to work on the product, work on the team, the local team. And a lot of the companies, raising a Series B round will leverage that money basically to expand physically, expand internationally, build their team, their capacity, and doing market entry. So combining that kind of data, kind of signal with things like keywords and things like, looking at whether or not a company has a specific presence into Latin America or their country has been a great way to be very targeted with their FDI attraction strategy. So we came up with that concept of @query, which is something that an abbreviation for here and there, but we allow our users to basically look for companies that may have a presence in a given country or region, but may not have, a subsidiary or branch in their specific state or county or country. So a great, clever way for Sunday to leverage AI and be successful. If we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about another use case, which is reshoring. So this is something we've seen a lot, lately. The fact that we've been able to look for value chain analysis and provide that kind of data. One of our clients, the World Trade Center Utah, has been leveraging this specific data in all sort of different ways. But certainly, the first thing that they wanted to do is to look at who are the domestic companies. So who are those companies in Utah that do have an international presence, and is there any reshoring opportunities? Is there anything that they're currently producing abroad that they could be producing here? So that kind of use cases, we've seen a lot. The other angle here is, can we find suppliers that are typically supplying the kind of clusters that we have here in the region, and basically use that as a way to approach those suppliers and use that as part of our our strategy to reach out to those companies. So in Utah, they're pretty strong in aerospace and health technology and sporting goods, natural products. So the idea is like, let's go and find out what AI tells us about those industries and supply chains, and can we go and identify those suppliers that we could basically reach out to and attract. So certainly that's been really, really good. And last but not least, from an RFI, from a prospecting standpoint, how can we show those potential suppliers the kind of suppliers and partners and clients and buyers that they would have access to if they locate into our region. So reshoring's been a really, really strong use case on how successful EDOs have been using AI. We'll go to number 4, next slide. We'll talk about another one of my favorites. So benchmarking your EDO. Steve mentioned earlier on, the principle of fit. I'm also a big fan in terms of targeting. I think that if you want to be successful in investment attraction, you need to be targeted. You need to know your unique value proposition, and you need to basically, benchmark yourself and find out where you have a competitive advantage versus other EDOs. And one way to do that is to use AI and use functionalities like heat maps to look how do I advantageously compare to other, regions in the world, and where can I identify companies that are actually evolving in industries or have a business context that would necessitate the kind of value proposition that I have to offer. So in the case of Economic Development Coalition of Southwest Indiana, that would be things like low cost of doing business or available land, or the fact that they're strategically located for some industries and some companies. So again, leveraging AI to have that very targeted approach that would basically increase significantly their conversation with companies that do have an interest for that kind of value proposition. So definitely benchmarking your EDO has been a great case study for us. Next slide, and last case study that I have to cover before I let you explain to us the kind of advancement that we had with AI this year. So the last use case is really cool. So Bâton Rouge, that's one thing that I can say in French properly. Bâton Rouge Area Chamber. A lot of our clients been using Gazelle from a BRE standpoint. This is actually something that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. If you recall, I guess because we stopped going to restaurants and we all stayed home, actually a lot of breweries suffered from lack of, there was a lot of demand, I guess, for metal cans, and very few suppliers that was able to supply that industry. And that was actually a pretty cool use case where BRAC has been able to leverage the information inside of our platform and leverage AI to look for, okay, so is there any like suppliers, metal can and metal container manufacturers that are in fast growth and expansion mode that might be interested in, coming in the region, supplying, the companies in our region that are in needs for, metal cans for beer and other products. So, that was really a good way and a clever way of using AI, and certainly it was something that was extremely appreciated by the companies in the Bâton Rouge area. So I hope that you appreciate those 5 use cases and those examples. I mean, we're not short of examples. So if you want to discuss at some point your specific use cases, it will be my pleasure to be in touch with you. And now I will let Dr. Kelly take you to the next couple of slides of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone and Steve. I am Hugh Kelly, as mentioned, and first I'd like to discuss several ways in which Gazelle is unique. We're having some bandwidth issues with the internet out here in southern Wisconsin, so I'm going to turn my camera off just to make sure you can keep hearing me. Next slide, please. All right, so at least six or so ways in which Gazelle.ai is unique. One of the first things is that our AI is applied to a custom database that integrates and validates multiple public and private data sources. We also employ a large team of research associates who continually collect survey and other information directly from the firms and their websites. And this gives us access to firm level data on a much larger scale and a much more up-to-date scale. Gazelle.ai is also driven by multiple custom designed machine learning algorithms that are human subject or macro scale data validated and are typically based on the work of peer-reviewed academic researchers. Our approach involves extensive model comparisons of different algorithm structures, as well as comparison to alternative statistical methods. Gazelle.ai involves multiple forms of validation all throughout training and after the fact as we collect more information. And lastly, Gazelle runs on state-of-the-art in-house hardware. This allows us extensive capabilities for experimentation and allows us to really spend a lot of time, if we need to, searching the space, finding the relationship between predictors and firm expansions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the data underlying Gazelle, all of our AI predictors are categorized across firm level variables, regional variables, and industry variables. Firm level variables are obtained from third-party and internal sources, as I mentioned. Regional variables may be indexed at the county or state level. And most industry signals are indexed at the county and 4 or 6-digit NAICS level, but some of our data is just industry specific, so it's just indexed at the 4 or 6 level, 4 or 6-digit level. A key aspect of any AI analysis involves how one develops subsamples out of the overall data set for training, validation, and large-scale predictions. Our analysis training data set is used to train the model. This involves data with hand-verified outcomes and predictors. The analysis validation data set is used for validation tests. That's not used in AI training and is similarly hand verified. And lastly, the prediction data set is an 18 million record panel of firms, industries, and predictor data that is combined with the analysis training data set parameters to produce G-scores. The expansion outcomes for this prediction data set are unknown, but that's what we're providing predictions for. Because the data from various sources becomes available throughout the year at different points in time, depending upon the time of year, we have to perform what we call a lag 1 versus a lag 2 analysis. The basic idea is early in the year, when the government has not yet released information for the previous year, we have to go farther back in time to predict for the time period of interest, say 2020 to 2021. But at the end of the year, in this case, the end of 2020, government has released most of its information, and at that point we can do what we call a lag 1 analysis, where we can use more recent information for making predictions for our period. So early in the year we use a lag 2 analysis, late in the year we can use a lag 1, and that makes it a little bit more accurate towards the end of the year. Next slide, please. Before moving on to some of the results, I'd like to highlight some of the recent improvements we've made to Gazelle kind of in response to this COVID outbreak. First of all, we've been able to increase the analysis training data set by about 30%, and we've nearly tripled the prediction data set to 18 million firm by industry combinations. Because of all this extra training data, we've been able to disaggregate the advanced manufacturing industrial group into 4 additional groups. So that's for a total of 5 industrial groups within that advanced manufacturing category. And that was necessary because as we got more data, we found that there seemed to be increasing heterogeneity among the firms in that group, and they really needed to be analyzed separately. We've introduced 59 new firm level and contemporaneous variables. These are designed to better capture firm-specific weekly and monthly events, such as COVID-19. We've improved our algorithms' mathematical structures by introducing dynamic deep learning. Basically, this means each of the 21 industrial groups we consider can have its own deep learning structure, depth of the deep learning network. We've introduced multiple speed and scale upgrades to our various programs, including further refinements to our parallel processing and GPU routines. This basically means we can just analyze more data and faster. We've deployed a 4th type of concurrent machine learning algorithm for training. This additional algorithm basically allows us to search through the parameter space to find the relationship between predictors and expansions more quickly and more comprehensively. Because we have this new data, and because of a lot of the data we have has been shocked from the COVID, shocked outside its typical ranges, we've had to recalibrate our hypertan normalization function. Basically, this just takes all the data from whatever scale they're in and compresses them into the same scale, and that allows us to analyze the relative importance of those variables within the AI. And last but not least, we've introduced the why is the G-score happening option. What this does is disaggregate a firm's propensity to expand, which gives us its G-score, into 6 sub-propensities, reflecting firm level, industry, regional, deep learning, and supply and demand chain conditions. So this can be pretty useful when you're comparing 2 firms. Say one might have a G-score 5, one has a 4, and you ask yourself, what's the difference? The why is the G-score happening option will give you some insights into that. So that is essentially the Gazelle.ai state of the art at the moment. Next slide, please. What I'd like to do now is just discuss some of the key results for our recent Q3 2020 G-score production run. Overall, in the analysis training data set, our AI has achieved a cross-industry group average of 70% accuracy. What that means is in the analysis training data set where we have known expansions and non-expansions, we predicted correctly 70% of the time when we pool expansions and non-expansions together. For expansions, we averaged about 75% across all the 21 industrial groups. And for non-expansions, we averaged about 69%. In terms of the prediction data set and shares of firms predicted to announce expansions in 2020 and 2021, these would be firms with G-scores of 2 or above. We predicted an average expansion rate of about 38%. So 38% on average of the firms in an industrial group are predicted to be expanding. And now this is quite high, and the reason for this is because we're oversampling on expansion events in order to better identify the drivers. Typically, you might see something closer to 6% when you average all the firms in the US. We're tending to focus more on the high performance growth firms. And lastly, the so-called STAR test, what this does is confirm if our G-scores predict known historical expansions in the analysis validation data set. So this is an out-of-sample generalization test. As you can see there, our G-scores range from 1 to 5. 1 is a prediction of non-expansion. 2 through 5 are increasing 25th quartiles of the propensity to expand. And what you can see here is our G-score of 5 averages about 87% accurate across the 21 industry groups, and 5 of the groups achieved 100% accuracy. And this is an out-of-sample test, so that's pretty good. Our G-scores of 4 average around 80%, with 4 groups achieving 100% accuracy. G-scores of 3, about 76, 3 groups achieving 100% accuracy. And G-scores of 2, which is the lowest propensity firm we predict to expand, we were correct 73% of the time in our analysis validation data set, and 1 group achieved 100% accuracy. A group is an industry group. G-scores of 1, the non-expansion averaged about 51%. So overall, the majority of these validity percentages represent increases or maintenance of accuracy compared to previous runs, which is pretty good considering the shock that we've all experienced. Next slide, please. I can also give a few details about the changes in the very top signals. The top 10 list from among the top 10% of largest absolute association weight variables. To be in the top 10 list, a signal must be among the top 10% of the most important signals for more than 4 industries. And the higher on the list, the more industries a signal is in the top 10% for. A key similarity with respect to previous runs for this information includes the fact that industry data for firm financials still plays a very important role. Those variables captured 5 of the top 10 list of variables, and much of the dominance of this financial information comes from signals reflecting sales of the firm, the industry, or the county of firm residence. Another similarity is that many regional indicators appear in the top 10% of signals for multiple industries. They captured 4 of the top 10 list. A key difference with respect to previous runs is that the regional workforce characteristics now play a much larger role, with one of them, adult education rates, residing on the top 10 list, and that's one of the first times that's happened. In contrast, traditional bachelor degrees continue to increasingly appear less important. Another difference concerns firm level variables. Although one of these firm level variables lies in the top 10, few firm level variables lie among the top 10% of signals from more than 4 industries. Instead, each industry always has a few unique firm level signals that are important for it. So the conclusion we can take from this information is that we must temper our result that firm level variables are important against the fact that finding the right one for your industry might be difficult. In contrast, industry variables are more likely to be as important, and the same ones may be relevant for many different industries. So if you're trying to economize on data, that should give you some insights there. Next slide, please. There we go. Now what I want to do is provide a bit of summary of our results describing where the gazelles are predicted to be. And where in this context has 2 interpretations. One is where are the gazelles in terms of industries, and that's what this figure is showing us here. The second one that I'll look at in a little bit later is where the gazelles are in terms of counties and regions. So taking a broad top-down view of the first definition, where in the industries are the gazelles, what we've done here is create a modified Harvard industry cluster map. The original Harvard Industry Cluster Map reports the observed historical linkages among industries. Each circle on this graph represents an industry, and their spatial proximity represents their similarity. We've modified this figure to also illustrate high predicted industry performance with heat map colors. And so the map summarizes the industries that have a high average share of to-be-called firms with G-scores greater than 1, and high share of high performing firms, firms with 4s and 5 G-scores. Red indicates a high average share, blue would be indicating a low average share. And what we see here are two red little circles, two red industries are in domestic metals and upstream, downstream and upstream metals. So they've predicted to be very high performing. The orange ones would be the next highest industries, which includes production, technology, biopharma, and education. In fact, in education, there's also healthcare and furniture. And of course, the lowest performing industries would be the ones that are blue, and those include things like performing arts. Obviously, we can't go into the theaters as much, printing, apparel, footwear, textile, things along those lines. So this basically gives you a broad sense of all of the industries internationally. Where are we seeing growth according to our G-scores? And that summarizes that whole thing in one nice picture. Next slide, please. Now I can consider where the gazelles are predicted to be across US counties by looking at counties with the largest average share of to be called firms and shares of firms with 4s and 5 G-scores for a particular industry. Intuitively, what this represents is counties with a lot of predicted growth in that specific sector and with a large share of high performers. Graphically, it's just going to be represented as a heat map of county averages for a particular industry. Next slide, please. So I only have three of these, I believe. So as a former academic, I was interested in what the future holds for the US educational, health, and university system, according to the data that we have. Perhaps this is not relevant for BR&E, as universities tend not to move, just like NFL teams. So we should be fairly sure we're not stepping on any of our clients' toes. Graphically, what we're seeing here is that there's predominantly high predicted growth in the Midwest and the East, the area around New York to Boston. Of course, there's still potential for growth in other parts of the country. It's just that the propensity for growth is lower. We can also use the why is the G-score happening option to figure out what's going on here. What we observed is that firm level variables tended to have sub G scores of around 3. That suggests that firm level performance is less important for this particular sector, but the industry variables had sub G scores that were mostly 5s. That's at the maximum. So that indicates that local industry performance is a critical driver for health and education and social assistance. Similarly, regional variables had sub G scores of around 4, indicating that regional variables are also a necessary component for a strong firm performance. Can't really talk too much about the deep learning thing. It's a little bit hard to understand that, but the supply chain and demand chain in this one case also had very low sub G scores. So what that tells us that those things were a little less important for predicting high performance in the health and education sector. Next slide, please. Now I can look at maybe a more interesting case occurring in the manufacturing sector, primary and fabricated metal and machines, specifically optimal instrument and lens manufacturing. Looking at the heat map here, it's a little different. We tend to see a lot of this manufacturing activity occurring around the coasts and perhaps around Colorado and Utah there a bit. The why is the G-score happening information suggests that the firm level variables tend to have sub G scores of 4 and 5. That indicates that firm level performance is a key associate with high growth propensity in this manufacturing sector. Industry variables tended to be lower, mostly sub G scores of 3. Regional variables are nearly all sub G scores of 4 with a smattering of 5. That tells us that regional performance, good regional performance is necessary for strong firm performance. The supply chain performance, again, was very low, indicating that was not important. But the demand chain factors were nearly all sub G scores of 5, indicating that demand chain features at those locations is a key factor in creating high growth performance. So if people are interested in attracting this type of sector, a region's value proposition should maybe focus on highlighting the high performance of local firms in this broad industry and on marketing strong known regional factors and demand chain factors. Maybe I'll skip the next slide and just jump to the end there since we're a little out of time. Yes. So I thought I'd like to end with something different, not for something different. I thought it'd be interesting to look with an example of a supposedly declining industry. This particular industry is the one that produces chemicals that have a particular application to newsprint. Conventional wisdom and observations suggest this would be a declining industry, which is being supplanted by electronic media publishing. But the heat map shows that even so, there's still some relative high performers and hotspots, although not a lot of firms. Graphically, we see there's limited activity, as one would expect, centered around small clusters in New York and in the Southeast. What does the YG score tool tell us? Well, firm level variables tend to have sub-G scores of 4 and 5, near the maximum, suggesting firm performance is a key associate with these types of firms succeeding. Industry variables tend to be lower, mostly sub-G scores of 3, suggesting industry performance is not a strong predictor of firm performance. Regional variables are nearly all sub-G scores of 5. That indicates that strong regional performance is necessary for strong firm performance in this sector. Again, supply chain factors were pretty low sub-G scores, and again, the demand chain factors were nearly all 5s again, indicating that strong demand chain factors in the areas is what's contributing to the high propensity to expand for these firms. All right, so that's all I have to report for the moment. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Hugh, we did have one question as it related to the food processing in the cluster chart that we put together. And I was wondering if maybe you could spend just a couple of seconds to explain, you know, what the likelihood for expansion in that particular industry is, given the color coding.
Let's see, where is that? Blue, food processing. So the blue indicates that across all of the industries and all of the firms in the world that we have in our database, food processing is among the lowest propensity to expand. In other words, the firms in that sector are more often likely to have G-scores of 1 than a G-score that's bigger than 1. So the AI is telling us that that's probably not going to be a growing sector. There's a lot of possible reasons for that. I mean, one of them is probably having to do with the fact that all of our restaurants are closed, and you know, the food processor, the demand chain of the food processors has been damaged. We actually see that kind of out here in the agricultural area of Wisconsin where I live. There's not as much demand for a lot of the products that are being produced. And that's happening elsewhere as well. So it could be related to that. That could just be a temporary effect of COVID.
Okay, thanks, Hugh.
In contrast, you know, looking at printing, that printing was, we know that's a declining industry, so that might be less impacted by recent events, and that's just more of a long-term industry trend that's pushing it down, except for those 2 places I found.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, do we have any other questions? You can feel free to write them in the question tab. I tried my best to respond to them over the course of the webinar, but if anybody has any other questions, please feel free. I don't see any being added right now, so if I just sort of scoot down to our last slide, if anybody would like more information, whether it be on the content that we presented here today or on the platform itself, you can please feel free to contact us through our website at www.gazelle.ai. You can reach me directly if you like, Steve Jast, at steve@gazelle.ai. And that concludes our webinar for today. So on behalf of Hugh and Simon and myself, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us today. Sorry we went over by a couple of minutes. And please, everybody, have a very, very happy and very, very healthy holiday season. We wish you all the very, very best for 2021. And we look forward to being in touch with all of you in the near future. So thanks again for joining today, and all the very best.